The alarm tore through Horizon Station before I even opened my eyes. Red light bathed my quarters, pulsing like a heartbeat gone wrong. I rolled out of my bunk, grabbed my jacket, and ran into the hallway where a dozen other people were already moving, fast, silent, focused. "Hull breach on Deck 4, a voice said over the comm. "All non-essential personnel, remain in quarters. Engineering teams, report immediately." I was not engineering. I was a translator, a nobody with a decent grip on the Vaeltari language and a habit of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. But Deck 4 was where the alien delegation worked, and if something had gone wrong there, someone needed to explain what was happening to them in their own language, fast, before panic turned into an international incident between two species that had barely learned to trust each other. I ran. The corridor narrowed as I moved toward the affected section, emergency lights flickering, the metal groaning under pressure changes I could feel in my teeth. Steam, or maybe coolant vapor, hissed from a cracked pipe near a bulkhead door. Two engineers wrestled with a sealant gun, trying to patch a breach before the pressure differential ripped the whole section open. That was when I saw her. Saralyn stood near a control panel, her long silver-blue fingers moving across a display faster than I could follow, her violet eyes narrowed in concentration. She was one of the Vaeltari scientists assigned to the station, a quiet, careful woman who rarely spoke more than she needed to. Right now, she was rerouting power away from a damaged conduit, the only person on that deck who seemed to understand the alien systems better than the humans who built half of this station's diagnostic tools. "Move back," she said to me, without looking up, her voice steady, despite the chaos. "This section may vent." "I need to help," I said, stepping closer, instead of retreating, like any sensible person would. "Tell me what to do." She glanced at me then, just for a second, and there was something in her expression I couldn't read yet. Not annoyance, not quite surprise either. "Hold this," she said, shoving a diagnostic tool into my hands. "Keep the reading steady. If it climbs past the red line, shout." I held it. My hands were shaking, but I held it steady enough. The station groaned again, louder this time, and somewhere behind us, a support strut buckled with a sound like a giant exhaling. Saralyn worked faster. Her markings, the faint bioluminescent patterns along her collarbone and temples, flickering brighter as her concentration deepened. I had read once that Vaeltari markings changed with emotion, though nobody outside their people fully understood the details. "There," she said finally, tapping a sequence into the panel. The hissing stopped. The light stopped flickering and steadied into a calm white glow. The pressure alarm cut off mid-wail, replaced by an almost eerie silence. For a moment, neither of us moved. I let out a breath I did not know I had been holding, and something in me, exhaustion maybe, or relief, or the simple giddy joy of still being alive, made me say the first thing that came to my mind. "You're beautiful," I said. "The way you just did that. Beautiful." I meant it the way any human might mean it in that moment, an offhand compliment, the kind we hand out freely to friends, to strangers, to a sunset or a piece of music that moves us. I did not think about it. I did not plan it. It simply fell out of my mouth the way water falls from a cracked pipe. Saralyn went very still. The markings along her collarbone, which had been glowing a soft violet moments before, deepened into a rich, warm shade of rose, spreading up her neck and across her cheeks like a blush no human skin could produce. Her lips parted slightly. Her eyes, wide now, fixed on mine with an intensity that made my stomach twist in a way I did not expect. "What did you say?" she asked, her voice quieter than before, almost a whisper. I realized, too late, that something had shifted in the air between us, something I did not understand yet. "I said you were beautiful," I repeated, slower this time, unsure now whether I had said something wrong. "The way you fixed that, calm under pressure, it was impressive. I meant it as a compliment." She did not answer right away. Around us, engineers moved past, shouting updates to each other, sealing the last of the breach, and life on the station continued as if nothing unusual had happened. But between the two of us, something had changed, something neither the alarms, nor the vented steam, nor the danger we had just survived could explain. "Say it again," she said. I blinked. "What?" "Say it again," Saralyn repeated, and this time her voice trembled just slightly, the composed scientist cracking open to reveal something raw and uncertain underneath. "Please." I did not fully understand what I had triggered. I did not know, in that moment, that I had just said words no human had ever said to a Veiltari before, at least not outside of certain sacred, private circumstances that her people guarded more carefully than most guard their lives. I did not know that among her people, calling someone beautiful was not a casual compliment. It was a declaration. It meant something closer to, "I see who you truly are, and what I see is precious to me." I did not know any of that yet. All I knew was that the woman standing in front of me, markings glowing rose across her pale blue skin, eyes wide and searching mine, looked like she was holding her breath waiting for an answer. "You're beautiful," I said again, softer this time, meaning it just as much as before, though I still did not understand why it mattered so much to her. Her breath caught. For a moment, I thought she might step back, might retreat behind that professional calm she wore like armor. Instead, she stepped closer, close enough that I could see the fine structure of her irises, rings within rings of violet and silver, close enough that I could smell something faintly like ozone and cool rain that seemed to cling to her skin. "Thank you," she whispered, and though the words were simple, the way she said them carried a weight I could feel, even without understanding it. Nobody has said that to me before. Not like that. Not so easily. "I didn't mean to make it strange," I said, suddenly self-conscious. "Where I come from, we say things like that all the time. It's not usually a big deal." "It is a very big deal here," she said, and something like a small, disbelieving laugh escaped her, quickly suppressed. "You truly do not know what you have said, do you?" Before I could answer, the ship's comm crackled to life again. "All personnel, breach contained, situation stable, return to standard operations. Repeat, situation stable." The corridor around us slowly returned to its usual rhythm, engineers packing up tools, officers filing reports, the tension of the last 20 minutes bleeding out of the air like the steam that had vented from the broken pipe. But Saralyn did not move away from me immediately. She lingered, studying my face, as if trying to solve an equation she had never encountered before. "I have duties to attend to," she said finally, straightening her posture, though the rose color along her markings had not fully faded. "But I would like to speak with you again, if that is acceptable to you." "Of course," I said, still slightly dazed by the entire encounter. "Any time." She gave a small nod, turned, and walked away down the corridor, her steps measured and careful, though I noticed she glanced back once, before disappearing around the corner. I stood there for a long moment, diagnostic tool still in my hand, trying to make sense of what had just happened. I had said one careless word, a word I used almost daily back on Earth without thinking twice, and it had cracked something open in her that I did not fully understand. I did not know yet that this single accidental compliment would change everything, not just for the two of us, but for the fragile, uncertain relationship between our two species. I did not know that somewhere in the station's upper levels, Veiltari elders were already receiving reports of the incident, reports that would soon reach ears far less forgiving than Saralyn's. I did not know that I had just stepped, without meaning to, into the middle of a tradition older than my own civilization's written history. All I knew, standing there in that quiet, steaming corridor, was that something in her eyes had asked me a question I did not yet have the language to answer, and that I very much wanted to find out what it was. I made my way back to the control room, still turning her words over in my mind. "Say it again, please." The way she had said it, fragile and hopeful all at once, stayed with me long after the adrenaline of the breach had faded. I filed my incident report on autopilot, barely registering the questions my supervisor asked about the conduit failure, my mind circling back again and again to the image of her markings blooming rose beneath the emergency lights. Later that evening, after the station had settled back into its usual quiet hum, I found myself sitting alone in the observation lounge, watching the stars slide past the reinforced glass. I did not expect company, but when the door slid open behind me and I turned, I saw Lucas Grant, one of the few other translators on the station, and a friend I trusted enough to ask the question that had been eating at me all day. "You look like you saw a ghost," Lucas said, dropping into the seat across from me. "I think I said something wrong today," I admitted, to one of the Vaeltari. Lucas raised an eyebrow. "What did you say?" "I called her beautiful." Lucas went very quiet. He set down the drink he had been holding and looked at me with an expression somewhere between disbelief and concern. "You did what?" "It was an accident," I said quickly. "She fixed a breach. Calm under pressure." I said it without thinking, the way you'd compliment anyone back home. But she reacted like I'd said something enormous. Her markings changed color. She asked me to say it again. Lucas exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair. "Do you know anything about Vaeltari courtship customs?" "No," I admitted. "Should I?" "You might want to learn, and fast," Lucas said, his voice quiet but serious. "Because from what I've heard, what you just did is not something they take lightly, not at all." Outside the window, the stars continued their slow, silent drift, indifferent to the quiet storm I had just, without meaning to, set into motion. Lucas did not waste time. He pulled up his personal terminal right there in the lounge and started searching through the cultural database the diplomatic corps had compiled since first contact. I leaned over his shoulder, reading as fast as he could scroll. "Here," he said, tapping the screen. "Vaeltari Social Customs, section on emotional expression. Listen to this. Among the Vaeltari, the concept of beauty is not treated as a surface observation. It is considered a statement of deep recognition, an acknowledgement that one has seen past the outer form of another being, into their essential nature. To call someone beautiful is to say that you perceive their truth, and that what you perceive moves you." "That sounds intense," I said. "It gets more intense," Lucas continued, scrolling further. "The word is rarely spoken outside of family bonds, life partnerships, or certain sacred ceremonies. Elders warn their children against using it carelessly, since a false or careless use of the word is considered deeply dishonest, almost cruel, because it suggests a bond that does not exist." I sat back, the weight of what I had done finally settling over me. So when I said it to her, casually, the way we'd say it about a sunset back home, "You told her that you saw her truth," Lucas said quietly, "and that it moved you. That's not a small thing to her, even if it was nothing to you." "It wasn't nothing," I said, surprising myself with how quickly the words came out. "I meant it. I just didn't know what it meant to her." Lucas studied me for a long moment, then closed the terminal. "Then you have a choice to make. You can go find her and explain that you didn't understand the weight of what you said. Apologize. Let it go quietly. Or you can figure out whether you actually meant something by it, and if you did, be ready for what that means, because from what I'm reading here, this isn't the kind of thing you can take back once it's out there among her people." I did not answer right away. I thought about the way her markings had bloomed, rose in that corridor, the way her voice had cracked when she asked me to say it again, the way she had lingered before walking away as if she did not quite want to leave. I thought about the calm, precise way she had rerouted power through a failing system while metal groaned around us, unshaken, even as the deck threatened to vent into space. "I don't want to take it back," I said finally. Lucas raised both eyebrows. "Then you'd better learn fast, because if her people find out an outsider said something like that to one of their own, especially a young unbonded woman, there are going to be questions. And not friendly ones." 2 days passed before I saw Saralyn again. I spent that time reading everything the station's cultural database had on Vaeltari customs, trying to understand a species I had spent months translating for, but apparently understood far less than I thought. I learned that Veiltari society placed enormous value on restraint and precision in emotional expression, not because they lacked feeling, but because they considered feelings too important to be spent carelessly. Their language itself reflected this. Where humans might have a dozen casual words for affection, admiration, and attraction, the Veiltari had almost none, reserving instead a small handful of weighted words used so rarely that entire lifetimes might pass between their utterance. Beauty was one of those words. I also learned, buried deeper in the archive, that Veiltari courtship, when it happened, unfolded slowly, over months or even years, built on small gestures of trust and careful truth-telling rather than the rapid declarations humans were used to. A single misplaced word, spoken too soon or too carelessly, could be seen as either deeply disrespectful or, in rare cases, as a kind of accidental proposal that the recipient could choose to accept or firmly reject. I had no idea which one my words had been. On the third day, I received a message on my personal terminal, short and formally worded, requesting my presence in the Botanical Dome at the end of my shift. It was signed simply, Saralyn. I arrived early, nervous, in a way I had not felt since my first diplomatic assignment years ago. The Botanical Dome was one of the quieter places on the station, filled with plants brought from a dozen worlds, humidity thick in the air, sunlight simulators casting a warm golden glow over rows of unfamiliar greenery. I found her standing near a cluster of pale blue flowers that seemed to glow faintly in the low light, her hands clasped behind her back, her posture composed once more, though I noticed her markings still carried a faint undertone of color along her collarbone. "Thank you for coming," she said as I approached. "Of course," I said. "I wanted to talk to you too. I think I owe you an explanation." She tilted her head slightly, curious. "An explanation for what?" "For what I said," I said carefully. "I didn't understand what that word meant to your people. Where I come from, calling someone beautiful is common. We say it about people, about art, about sunsets, about almost anything that strikes us as lovely in the moment. I didn't realize it carried so much weight here. I don't want you to think I was careless with something sacred to you." Saralyn was quiet for a moment, studying the pale blue flowers beside her rather than looking at me directly. "I have read about human customs of speech," she said finally. "I understand now that your intention was not disrespect, but I must ask you something, and I would like an honest answer." "Anything," I said. "When you said the word, before you understood its meaning to us, did you mean it as your people mean it? Did you truly see something in me that moved you, even if you did not know the weight your words carried here?" The question hung in the humid air between us, simple and direct, in a way that caught me off guard. I thought about lying, about softening the answer into something safer, something that would not complicate an already delicate situation. But something about her steady, searching gaze made me want to tell her the truth instead. "Yes," I said, "I meant it. The way you worked through that crisis, calm, precise, completely unshaken, while everything around you was falling apart, it struck me. It still strikes me, thinking about it now. I don't know if that's what your word means exactly, but whatever I felt in that moment was real." The color along her markings deepened again, spreading warmly across her cheeks, though this time she did not look away or seem overwhelmed by it. Instead, something like relief crossed her expression, followed by a small, careful smile, the first genuine smile I had seen from her since we met. "Among my people," she said slowly, "what you describe is very close to what we mean by the word. We do not use it for surface things, only for moments when someone's true character reveals itself clearly, and that revelation moves the observer deeply. You experienced something like that. You simply did not know the name we give it. So, I said the right thing. I said, half relieved, half still unsure. I just said it without knowing what it cost." "It cost nothing," she said, "if it was true. The danger lies only in speaking it falsely, or carelessly, without truth behind it." You did neither, even if you did not know our customs. I felt something loosen in my chest, a tension I had not realized I was carrying since that moment in the corridor. I'm glad, I said. I didn't want to have hurt you or dishonored something important to you. You did not, she said. Then, after a pause, she added quieter, in truth, I have thought of little else these past 2 days. I did not know what to say to that, so I simply stood there, letting the warmth of her words settle over me the way sunlight settled over the flowers around us. Can I ask you something now? I said finally. Of course. What happens next? I mean, among your people, once something like this is said and understood, what usually follows? Saralyn considered the question carefully, her fingers absently brushing one of the pale blue petals beside her. Traditionally, a period of careful acquaintance follows. Both individuals spend time together, sharing small truths, testing whether the recognition was accurate, whether it deepens or fades with familiarity. It is slow, by your standards, I imagine. It can take much time before anything more is spoken or decided. That sounds reasonable, I said. I'd like that, if you're willing. I am willing, she said, and though her voice remained measured, there was warmth beneath the words that had not been there before. Though I must caution you, not everyone among my people will approve of this. There are elders who believe such recognition should remain entirely within our own kind, especially so soon after our two peoples have begun speaking to each other at all. If this becomes known, there may be difficulties. I'm not afraid of difficulties, I said, and I meant it, though I did not yet know how serious those difficulties would eventually become. Then perhaps, Saralyn said, the faint smile returning to her lips, we should proceed carefully and see what grows between us, one honest conversation at a time. Over the following weeks, that is exactly what we did. We met in the Botanical Dome after shifts, in quiet corners of the station's library, occasionally in the observation lounge where I had first confessed my confusion to Lucas. We talked about everything, our different worlds, our different ways of measuring time and grief and joy, the strange coincidences and stranger differences between human and Veiltari history. She taught me small phrases in her native tongue that were not found in any translation database, words too intimate or too rarely used to have been recorded by outside researchers. I taught her human idioms that made her laugh, a rare, quiet sound that always seemed to surprise her as much as it delighted me. Slowly, carefully, something began to grow between us, exactly as she had described, one honest conversation at a time. But not everyone on the station shared our patience. I began to notice, in the weeks that followed, subtle signs that our growing closeness had not gone entirely unnoticed. Certain Veiltari officials grew colder toward me during official meetings. A senior elder named Doran, whom I had only interacted with briefly during translation duties, began watching me with an expression I could only describe as calculating suspicion whenever our paths crossed in the corridors. Saralyn, too, seemed to sense the shifting atmosphere, though she said little about it directly, only that certain conversations at home had become more frequent and more pointed than she was used to. I did not yet understand how serious those conversations had become, or how soon they would force both of us into a position neither of us had chosen, but both of us would have to face. The trouble arrived on an otherwise ordinary morning, 3 months after the breach that had brought Saralyn and me together. I was reviewing translation logs in the small office I shared with 2 other linguists when my terminal chimed with an urgent message from Station Command. All senior translators were to report immediately to the main conference deck. No further details were given, which in my experience usually meant something had gone very wrong. When I arrived, the room was already tense. Station Commander Ellery stood at the head of the table, flanked by 2 Veiltari officials I recognized from previous diplomatic sessions. Doran was among them, his expression as unreadable as ever, though something in the set of his shoulders told me this was not a routine meeting. "We have a situation," Commander Ellery said without preamble. "Overnight, Someone tampered with the station's primary life support regulator on Deck 6. We caught it before it caused real damage, but it was deliberate, and it was sophisticated. Someone with detailed knowledge of both human and Veiltari engineering systems did this. A murmur ran through the room. Deck 6 housed both human and Veiltari quarters, a shared living space that had become something of a symbol for how well our two species could coexist. An attack there was not just dangerous. It was a message. We believe this may be the work of a faction opposed to continued cooperation between our species, one of the Veiltari officials said, her voice measured but grave. There are those among my people, and I understand among yours as well, who see this alliance as premature, even dangerous. We must find who did this before trust between our peoples collapses entirely. I felt a cold weight settle in my stomach. I glanced toward Doran, who was watching the proceedings with the same calculating expression I had grown used to seeing directed at me. Something about his stillness bothered me, though I could not yet say why. All personnel with access to both engineering systems will be interviewed, Commander Ellery continued. That includes translators who work closely with Veiltari technical staff. I want full cooperation from everyone in this room. The meeting ended with assignments handed out, security sweeps scheduled, and a tension in the air that had not existed on the station before. As we filed out, Lucas fell into step beside me, his expression troubled. "This is bad," he muttered. "Sabotage this soon after first contact. It could set relations back years." "Or end them," I said quietly, thinking of Saralyn, of the quiet mornings we had shared in the botanical dome, of everything that suddenly felt fragile in a way it had not an hour before. I found her later that day in one of the station's research labs, standing over a console, her expression tight with worry. When she saw me, something in her posture eased, though only slightly. "You've heard," I said. "Everyone has heard," she said. "Doran has been in 3 closed meetings since this morning. He is not simply investigating the sabotage. I believe he is using it. Using it how? To argue that the alliance itself is the danger," she said, her voice low. "That closeness between our peoples, closeness like what we share, creates vulnerabilities that our enemies can exploit. He has never approved of humans among us, and he has certainly never approved of what has grown between you and me." "Does he know about us specifically?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. "He knows enough," she said, "enough to make it a convenient example in whatever argument he intends to make before the full council." That evening, I was called in for questioning, along with a dozen other station personnel who had access to the affected systems. The interview was brief and professional, conducted by a joint human and Veiltari security team, and I answered every question honestly. I had not been near Deck 6's regulator systems in weeks. My schedule and access logs confirmed it. I left the interview believing the matter would resolve itself quickly, that the real saboteur would be found among the disgruntled few who had always resented cooperation between our species. I was wrong about how quickly, and wrong about how it would unfold. 3 days later, Doran called for an emergency session of the Joint Council, the rarely convened body of human and Veiltari leadership responsible for overseeing the entire cooperative effort aboard Horizon Station. Saralyn came to find me before the session began, her expression carefully controlled in a way that told me she was working hard to hide how frightened she actually was. "He intends to name us," she said without preamble. "You and me, specifically, as an example of the danger this alliance poses. He believes the sabotage, whoever committed it, may have been motivated by resentment over exactly the kind of closeness we represent, humans and Veiltari growing too intimate, too quickly, before either side truly understands the other." "That's absurd," I said. "Neither of us had anything to do with the sabotage." "I know that," she said, "but Doran does not need us to be guilty of sabotage. He only needs us to be a symbol he can point to, proof that this alliance moves too fast, reaches too far, risks too much. If the Council agrees with him, even partially, it could mean new restrictions on contact between our peoples. It could mean the end of what we have built together, not through any fault of our own, but because we became useful to someone else's argument. I felt anger rising in me, sharp and immediate, though I tried to keep my voice steady. Then we go to the council ourselves. We don't let him control the story. Saralyn studied me for a long moment, something like fear and something like hope crossing her expression in quick succession. That would mean speaking openly, before the full council, about what has grown between us. It would mean no longer keeping this private. I know, I said, but hiding hasn't protected us. Maybe the truth will. She was quiet for a moment, then nodded slowly. Then we go together. The council chamber was larger than any room I had been in on the station. A wide circular space, with tiered seating for both human and Veiltari representatives. A design meant to symbolize equality between our two peoples, though the atmosphere in the room that day felt anything but equal. Doran stood near the center, addressing a chamber that had grown noticeably tense since the sabotage. We have all seen the danger that closeness between our species can create, Doran was saying, as Saralyn and I entered quietly and took seats near the back. I do not say this to condemn cooperation entirely, but to urge caution. When individuals allow personal feeling to override the careful traditions that have protected our people for generations, they create weaknesses that others may exploit, whether through sabotage, through manipulation, or through simple carelessness born of unfamiliarity. He paused, and though he did not look directly at us, I felt certain he knew exactly where we were sitting. I have observed, in recent months, an instance of exactly this kind of careless closeness developing aboard this very station. A bond forming too quickly, built on human customs of expression that our own traditions were never designed to withstand. I raise this not to shame those involved, but to illustrate the risk we accept when we move faster than wisdom allows. Commander Ellery, seated among the human representatives, frowned deeply. Elder Doran, if you have a specific concern, I would ask that you state it plainly, rather than through implication. Doran's gaze finally shifted toward us, and the entire chamber seemed to follow it. Very well. I refer to the bond formed between the human translator Oliver Bennett and the Veiltari researcher Saralyn, a bond initiated through a careless human expression of affection that our traditions reserve for only the most sacred of circumstances. I do not question their sincerity. I question whether either of them fully understands what they have begun, or what damage such beginnings might cause if allowed to spread unchecked among our younger generation. Whispers rippled through the chamber. I felt Saralyn tense beside me, and before I could think too carefully about what I was doing, I rose to my feet. "May I speak?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. Commander Ellery glanced at the Veiltari representatives, who conferred briefly before one of them nodded. "The council will hear you." I walked to the center of the chamber, aware of every eye in the room following me, aware of Saralyn watching from her seat with an expression I could not quite read. "Elder Doran is right about one thing," I began. "I did not understand your customs when I first spoke to Saralyn the way I did. I called her beautiful, without knowing that word carries weight among your people, far beyond what it carries among mine. That was a mistake born of ignorance, not disrespect." I paused, gathering my thoughts, aware that what I said next mattered more than almost anything I had said in my life. But here is what I have learned since then. Among my people, we call things beautiful often, not because the word means little to us, but because we choose, again and again, to notice beauty everywhere we look, in a sunset, in a piece of music, in the calm, steady hands of someone solving an impossible problem while the world shakes around her. We do not reserve the word for rare, sacred moments, because we believe beauty itself is not rare. We believe it is everywhere, if only we are willing to see it. I turned slightly, meeting Doran's gaze directly. "You fear that this makes the word cheap, that speaking it easily somehow diminishes its meaning. But I would ask you to consider the opposite. Perhaps a species that chooses to see beauty constantly, in nearly everything, understands something about the world that a species which hoards the word carefully has forgotten. Perhaps openness is not always weakness. Sometimes it is simply a different kind of strength. The chamber was silent. Doran's expression had not changed, but something in his stillness had shifted, become more thoughtful, less certain. As for the bond between myself and Saralyn, I continued, I will not pretend it does not exist, or that it grew quickly by your standards. It did. But it did not grow carelessly. Every step we have taken slowly, honestly, checking and rechecking whether what we felt was true. If that process troubles this council, I understand. But do not mistake speed for recklessness. We have been more careful with each other than perhaps either of us has been with anything in our lives. I returned to my seat, my heart pounding, uncertain whether I had helped our case or damaged it further. Saralyn reached over, briefly, and touched my hand, a small gesture that in her culture, I had learned, carried its own quiet significance. Then she rose. The chamber murmured again as she stood, clearly surprised that she, too, intended to speak. She walked to the center, where I had stood moments before, her posture composed, though I could see the faint rose color rising along her collarbone, visible even from where I sat. Elder Doran speaks of tradition as though it were fixed, unchanging, incapable of growth, she said, her voice carrying clearly through the silent chamber. But our traditions were built by our ancestors to serve us, not to trap us. When those ancestors first developed our customs around the word beauty, they did so because our people, in ancient times, struggled with dishonesty, with individuals claiming deep feeling they did not truly hold in order to manipulate others. The customs protected us from falseness, not from feeling itself. She glanced toward me briefly before continuing. What I have found in Oliver Bennett is not falseness. It is a kind of honesty I did not know existed, an openness that says beauty aloud, not to manipulate or deceive, but simply because it is true, and he sees no reason to hide it. I do not believe our ancestors would have opposed such honesty. I believe they would have recognized it as exactly the thing our customs were designed to protect. She turned to face Doran directly. You fear that this alliance moves too quickly, that closeness between our peoples creates vulnerability. But fear itself creates vulnerability. Elder Doran, fear is what someone exploited when they sabotaged Deck 6, hoping to turn us against each other before we had the chance to understand one another. I will not let that fear convince me to abandon something true simply because it grew faster than our old customs expected. The chamber remained silent for a long moment after she finished speaking. Commander Ellery finally cleared his throat. The Council will take these statements under consideration, she said carefully. In the meantime, the investigation into the sabotage continues, and I would remind everyone present that until we identify those responsible, further division among our personnel serves only their goals, whoever they may be. The session adjourned shortly after, the Council promising further discussion once the security investigation concluded. Saralyn and I left the chamber together, walking in silence through the corridors until we reached the observation lounge, our now familiar refuge. That was either very brave or very foolish, she said finally, breaking the silence. Maybe both, I admitted. Do you think it helped? I do not know, she said honestly. But I know I do not regret it. Neither did I, though neither of us could have known, standing there watching the stars drift past the reinforced glass, that the real danger to Horizon Station had not yet fully revealed itself, and that within days, both of us would be forced to prove, in far more immediate and far more dangerous circumstances, exactly what kind of strength, honesty, and openness could truly provide. 2 days after the council session, the station's sensors picked up an unidentified vessel approaching from the outer edge of the system, moving fast, its configuration matching nothing in either the human or Veiltari registries. Commander Ellery called a full alert before the ship had even cleared the outer markers, and within minutes, every corridor on Horizon Station buzzed with the controlled urgency of a crew preparing for the unknown. I was in the translation office when the alert sounded, and within moments, Lucas burst through the door, his face pale. "Unidentified ship inbound," he said. "Command thinks it might be connected to the sabotage. They're saying it could be a scout for a raiding group, opportunists who've heard rumors about tension between us and the Veiltari and want to exploit it while we're divided." My first thought was Saralyn. I found her already at her station in the research lab, working alongside a team of engineers trying to determine the vessel's origin and intent from the sparse data available. "Whoever they are not broadcasting any identification," she said as I approached, not looking up from her console. "Their approach vector suggests they know this station's layout. That is not something outsiders typically possess." "You think someone here gave them that information?" I said. "I think it is possible," she said grimly, "and I think it may explain the sabotage on Deck 6. A test, perhaps, to see whether our systems could be disrupted before a larger effort arrived." The unidentified vessel closed the remaining distance faster than anyone expected, and within the hour it had taken a defensive position just outside the station's docking perimeter, weapons systems active, refusing all hailing attempts. Commander Ellery ordered full lockdown, sealing every non-essential section of the station, arming the small defense contingent Horizon kept for emergencies, though everyone knew our meager defenses were no match for a vessel that size if it decided to attack directly. "They're not attacking," Saralyn said suddenly, studying the sensor readings. "Look at their weapon charge levels. They're holding position, not powering up for an assault. I believe they intend something else." Her prediction proved accurate within minutes, when the station's communication array picked up a broadcast, garbled at first, then clarified by the station's translation systems into a demand chillingly simple in its intent. The vessel's crew, a faction of mercenaries who had learned of the fragile new alliance between humans and Veiltari, intended to seize the station's central data core, believing it held technological secrets from both species valuable enough to sell to the highest bidder among a dozen hostile factions scattered across neighboring systems. "They believe our alliance has made us weak," Commander Ellery said grimly, addressing the assembled senior staff, both human and Veiltari, in the command center. "They believe internal division, exactly the division Elder Doran warned about, will make this station easy prey." "Then we prove them wrong," I said, surprising myself with how quickly the words left my mouth. Doran, present among the Veiltari leadership, looked at me with an expression I could not fully place, something between skepticism and reluctant curiosity. "You have a suggestion, human?" "The data core's security systems were designed jointly," I said, "half Veiltari architecture, half human encryption protocols. If these mercenaries expect a divided, weakened station, the fastest way to prove them wrong is to show them exactly how well our two systems work together, not apart." Saralyn stepped forward beside me. "I can adapt the core's defensive protocols in real time, but I will need someone who understands the human encryption layer intimately enough to synchronize changes instantly, without introducing vulnerabilities. If we do not perfectly coordinate, we risk collapsing our own defenses faster than the mercenaries could ever hope to breach them." Commander Ellery looked between the two of us, weighing the risk. "Bennett, you've worked with both systems longer than almost anyone on this station. Can you do this?" "Yes," I said, with far more confidence than I actually felt. Doran's gaze lingered on us both for a long moment before he finally spoke. "Then do it. Prove your council speech was more than pleasant words, human." We moved fast, Saralyn and I working side by side in the data core's central chamber, while the mercenary vessel outside grew increasingly impatient, its communications shifting from demands to outright threats, as our silence stretched past their expected response window. Around us, the low hum of the station's systems felt louder than usual, every sound amplified by the tension coiled tight in my chest. They're preparing a boarding attempt, an engineer called from a nearby console. Small craft launching from their main vessel, heading for Docking Bay 3. How long until they breach the bay? Commander Ellery asked. 6 minutes, maybe less. Sarah Lynn's hands moved across her console with practiced precision, her markings glowing bright violet with focused intensity. I am restructuring the core's outer security layer now. Bennett, I need the encryption key rotation synchronized to my changes exactly, or the system will lock us out entirely. Copy that, I said, my own hands flying across the interface, adjusting the human encryption protocols in careful rhythm with the shifting Veiltari architecture she was rebuilding in real time. It was unlike anything I had done before, not simple translation between two languages, but active collaboration between two entirely different ways of thinking about security itself, human logic and Veiltari logic, intertwining in ways neither species had ever attempted under this kind of pressure. Boarding craft docking now, the engineer reported, voice tight with tension. They're cutting through the airlock seal. Almost there, Sarah Lynn said, though I could hear the strain beneath her calm tone. Bennett, the next rotation needs to happen exactly as I mark it, not a second early or late. Ready, I said, watching her fingers move toward the final sequence. Now. I executed the rotation the instant she spoke, and for one heart-stopping moment, the entire system flickered, screens across the chamber dimming briefly before stabilizing into a new configuration neither human nor Veiltari security architecture alone could have produced. The combined system settled into place, stronger and more complex than either half had been separately. Core secured, Sarah Lynn announced, relief evident in her voice for the first time since the crisis began. Their access attempts will fail against this configuration. It draws on principles from both our systems in ways their tools were never designed to counter. A tense silence followed as everyone in the chamber waited to see whether the mercenaries would recognize their failure or attempt something more desperate. Minutes passed, the boarding craft's cutting tools audible even through the reinforced airlock doors, until finally, the sound stopped. They're retreating, the engineer called out, disbelief coloring his voice. Boarding craft, returning to the main vessel. Main vessel powering engines, breaking off approach. A ragged cheer rose through the command center, human and Veiltari voices mixing together in a rare moment of shared, unguarded relief. Commander Ellery allowed herself a small, tired smile before turning to address the room. Whoever they were, they came expecting an easy target, she said. They found something else instead. Doran approached slowly as the tension in the room began to ease, his expression unreadable as he studied Sarah Lynn and me standing together beside the now stabilized core. That was accomplished through cooperation, he said finally, between systems designed by two separate peoples, integrated by two individuals whose personal bond I recently condemned as reckless. It was, I said carefully, unsure where his words were leading. Doran was quiet for a long moment, his gaze moving between us. I have spent my long life believing that our traditions protect us by keeping certain things separate, certain bonds sacred and rare, certain systems pure and unmixed. Perhaps I have mistaken separation for safety too often. He paused. I do not say this lightly, human, but perhaps what grows between different peoples, when built honestly, creates something neither could achieve alone. It was not quite an apology, but from Doran, it was clearly as close as he intended to come. I still believe caution has its place, he continued. I will not withdraw every concern I raised before the council, but I will withdraw my objection to what exists between the two of you. Whatever else it is, it has proven itself neither careless nor weak. Sarah Lynn inclined her head slightly, a gesture of respect I had seen her offer to few others. That is more than I expected from you, Elder Doran. Do not mistake this for full approval, he said, though something almost like humor flickered briefly across his composed features. Merely for reconsideration. The council will still deliberate, but I suspect, after today, the deliberation will favor you both." As Doran turned to leave, coordinating with Commander Ellery on securing a full report of the encounter for the wider council, Saralyn turned to me, the tension of the last hour finally draining from her posture, replaced by something softer, something like quiet wonder. "We did that," she said, almost disbelieving. "Together." "We did," I said, matching her small, exhausted smile with one of my own. Neither of us spoke of what had almost happened, how close the mercenaries had come to breaching the station's most sensitive systems, how narrow the margin had been between success and disaster. In that moment, standing together amid the quiet hum of a secured system that bore both our fingerprints, human and Veiltari, intertwined into something new, none of that seemed to matter as much as simply having survived it, together, exactly as we had built everything else between us. The investigation into the earlier sabotage concluded within days, revealing that a small group of station personnel, sympathetic to the same mercenary faction that had attempted the raid, had been responsible for the Deck 6 tampering, hoping to weaken the station's defenses ahead of the larger attack. With the true culprits identified and removed, and the failed raid serving as undeniable proof of what cooperation between our two systems could achieve, the atmosphere aboard Horizon Station shifted in ways I would not have predicted even a week earlier. The Council reconvened one final time to address the matter Doran had raised weeks before, though this time the tone of the chamber felt entirely different from that first tense session. The council chamber felt different this time when I walked in beside Saralyn. The same circular design, the same tiered seating for human and Veiltari representatives, but the air itself seemed to carry less weight than it had during that first difficult session. Word of the failed raid, and of the role our combined systems had played in stopping it, had spread quickly through the station, and I could see it reflected in the expressions of those gathered. Less suspicion now, more curiosity, even something that might have been quiet respect. Commander Ellery opened the session without unnecessary formality. "We are gathered to conclude the matter raised previously regarding the relationship between translator Oliver Bennett and researcher Saralyn and its broader implications for cooperation between our two peoples. Given recent events, I believe the Council's perspective has shifted considerably. Elder Doran, would you like to begin?" Doran rose slowly, his expression more thoughtful than I had ever seen it. When I first raised my concerns, I believed I was protecting our traditions, our people, from a closeness that grew too quickly, built on customs neither side fully understood. I still believe caution matters. I still believe our traditions exist for good reason. But I have watched two individuals, one human, one Veiltari, take those traditions seriously enough to question them honestly, to test them against real danger, and to prove that what grows between different peoples, when built with patience and truth, can become something stronger than either people could build alone. He turned to look directly at us. "I do not retract my belief in careful tradition, but I retract my objection to this particular bond. It has been tested more thoroughly than most bonds among our own people ever are, and it has not been found wanting." A quiet murmur of agreement moved through both sides of the chamber. Commander Ellery nodded, satisfied, before turning to the wider council. "Does anyone wish to raise further objection?" Silence answered her, a silence that felt entirely different from the tense quiet of the previous session, this one settled and calm rather than charged with unresolved conflict. "Then let the record reflect," Commander Ellery said, "that this council finds no obstacle to continued cooperation, personal or professional, between our two peoples, provided such bonds continue to be built with the same honesty and care demonstrated here." The session adjourned shortly after, far more quickly and far more peacefully than any of us had expected weeks before. As the chamber emptied, Saralyn and I found ourselves walking together back toward the Botanical Dome, our familiar refuge, though this time the walk felt lighter, unburdened by the uncertainty that had shadowed every step since Doran first raised his objections. "It is over," Saralyn said quietly as we entered the dome. the humid air and pale golden light welcoming us the way it always had. Truly over. "It is," I said, though something in her tone made me look at her more closely. "You don't sound entirely relieved." She smiled faintly, moving toward the same cluster of pale blue flowers where we had spoken that first difficult conversation months ago. "I am relieved. I simply did not expect, when this began, that it would carry us through sabotage, council hearings, and an attempted raid before reaching this quiet moment. I find myself somewhat breathless, considering how far we have come from a simple word spoken by accident in a damaged corridor." I laughed softly, the tension of the past weeks finally beginning to ease from my shoulders. "I don't think either of us expected any of this." "No," she agreed. "But I find I do not regret a moment of it, difficult as it was." We stood together in comfortable silence for a while, watching the pale blue flowers glow softly in the dome's simulated evening light, listening to the quiet hum of the station around us, steady now, secure, no longer shadowed by the uncertainty that had followed us for so long. "Can I ask you something?" Saralyn said finally, breaking the silence. "Of course." She turned to face me fully, her expression open in a way I had rarely seen from her. The careful composure she usually maintained softened into something more vulnerable, more honest. "That first day, in the corridor, after the breach, you said something to me that changed everything that followed. I have often wondered, since then, whether you would say it again, now that you understand exactly what it means to me, exactly what it has cost us both to reach this point." I understood immediately what she was asking, the same question she had asked that very first day, though now carrying an entirely different weight, tested by everything we had endured together since. "Saralyn," I said, stepping closer, meeting her eyes directly, "you are beautiful. Not because I do not understand what that word means to your people anymore, but because I do understand, completely, and I mean it more now than I did that first day, when I said it without thinking." Her markings bloomed rose across her cheeks and collarbone, just as they had that first time, though this time there was no shock in her expression, no confusion, only warmth and quiet joy, and something that looked very much like happiness fully realized. "Say it again," she whispered, echoing her own words from months before, though now they carried no uncertainty, only invitation. "You are beautiful," I said again, softer this time, "and I am grateful, every day, that a mistake in a damaged corridor brought me to you." She reached out and took my hand, her fingers cool against mine, steady in a way that reminded me of that very first day, calm under pressure, unshaken by chaos, though now that same steadiness felt like something shared between us, rather than something I simply admired from a distance. "Among my people," she said softly, "when someone repeats those words freely, without fear, without hesitation, having understood their full weight, it is considered a formal acknowledgement, a declaration that the bond recognized is not fleeting, but intended to last." "Then I'm glad I meant every word," I said. Outside the botanical dome's reinforced glass, Horizon Station continued its steady orbit, secure now, strengthened by systems built from two different peoples working as one, strengthened too by a bond that had survived misunderstanding, political challenge, and genuine danger, emerging not weaker for the difficulty, but stronger, tested and proven exactly as Saralyn's own traditions demanded. Word of what had happened aboard Horizon Station spread slowly through both human and Veiltari territories in the months that followed, not as scandal, but as something closer to a quiet, hopeful example. Other bonds began to form between our two peoples, tentative at first, then increasingly open, as more individuals on both sides took courage from what Saralyn and I had proven together, that honesty, patience, and genuine effort could bridge even the widest gaps between two very different ways of understanding the world. Doran, of all people, became one of the more vocal supporters of continued cooperation in the following year, his earlier caution transformed into something more nuanced, an insistence not that closeness between our peoples be prevented, but that it always be built carefully, honestly, exactly as he had witnessed it built between us. As for Saralyn and me, we continued exactly as we had begun, one honest conversation at a time, one shared challenge after another, building something neither of us could have predicted from a single careless word spoken in a smoke-filled corridor months before. I do not know what the future holds for either of us, or for the fragile, growing alliance between our two peoples. But I know this. Sometimes the most important words are the ones we say without thinking, the ones that slip out before caution can stop them, revealing truths we did not even know we carried until the moment they left our lips. I called her beautiful by mistake. She asked me to say it again, and every day since, I have been glad that I did.